The war room on Nexus Prime fell silent as Admiral Taemin entered. His tall blue form moved with tired steps across the metal floor. Behind him, holographic displays showed red dots spreading across the galaxy map like a deadly disease. Each red dot meant another lost world, another million dead. The Galactic Coalition had been fighting the Vorthak Empire for 213 years. What started as a small border fight had grown into something much worse. Now entire star systems burned while Coalition forces retreated again and again. Taemin stopped before the central display. His crystal-like skin reflected the red glow of defeat. Around the circular table sat representatives from 12 different species. All of them looked as tired as he felt. Commander Yulhi stood first. Her forearms moved quickly as she spoke. The Terralian woman had lost 3 sons in the war. Her voice shook with anger and sadness. "We lost the Kepler system yesterday," she said. 3 full battle fleets gone, just gone. The numbers appeared on the main screen. 47,000 dead. 112 ships destroyed. The Coalition's best weapons and shields had meant nothing against Vorthak fury. Elder Wu Jin of the Ethereal Collective floated above his chair. His ghostly form pulsed with worry. "My people see the future in their dreams," he said softly. "All they see now is darkness." Taemin had heard these reports before, too many times. The Coalition had better technology than the Vorthak, better ships, better weapons, better training. None of it mattered. The problem was simple but deadly. Coalition forces fought like civilized beings. They followed rules. They tried to save lives. They used careful plans and smart tactics. The Vorthak fought like wild animals. When Coalition ships tried to capture enemy vessels, Vorthak crews would blow themselves up rather than surrender. When Coalition ground forces offered mercy to wounded enemies, Vorthak soldiers would use hidden bombs to kill their rescuers. Every battle became a nightmare of death and destruction. "Show them the latest intelligence," Taemin said to his aide. The hologram changed to show intercepted Vorthak communications. The alien text crawled across the screen while a computer voice translated the words. "Operation Darkstar will begin in 6 months," the voice said. "All Coalition core worlds will burn as one. No prisoners, no mercy. Total victory or total death." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood what this meant. The Vorthak were preparing their final attack. They would hit every important Coalition world at the same time. With Coalition forces scattered and weak, there would be no way to defend them all. Commander Yulhi's 4 hands clenched into fists. "How many ships can they field for this attack?" "Our spies count at least 8,000 war vessels," replied Intelligence Chief Baksu. His green scales had turned pale with fear. "Maybe more. They have been building ships faster than we can destroy them." The math was brutal. The Coalition could gather maybe 3,000 ships for defense. Against 8,000 Vorthak vessels driven by endless rage, it would be a massacre. "What about our secret weapons projects?" asked Representative Dalho from the Mechanical Collective. His robot body clicked and whirred as he processed the data. Taemin shook his head. "The new plasma cannons are still in testing. The shield generators keep failing under stress. We have nothing ready in time." The meeting continued for hours. Plan after plan was discussed and rejected. Retreat to the outer colonies. Negotiate a surrender. Launch desperate attacks on Vorthak supply lines. Nothing seemed likely to work. The Vorthak had grown stronger with each victory. Their warriors were born for battle. They lived for combat. Pain and death only made them fight harder. How could civilized people defeat an enemy like that? As the meeting was ending, a young officer rushed into the room. Lieutenant Kim-ji looked excited and scared at the same time. Her hand shook as she held out a data pad. "Admiral, forgive the interruption," she said quickly, "but our long-range scouts have found something." Taemin took the data pad. His crystal eyes widened as he read the report. "This can't be right. We checked it 3 times, sir. The signals are definitely artificial. Someone else is out there." The data showed radio waves coming from an unexplored part of space. The signals followed complex patterns that could only come from intelligent life. More importantly, some of the signals seemed to be communications between different locations. This meant the unknown species had space travel. They might have weapons. They might be willing to help. "Where exactly are these signals coming from?" asked Elder Wu Jin. Lieutenant Kim-ji activated her data pad. A new star map appeared on the main display. It showed a small yellow star with several planets around it. The third planet from the star glowed with a soft blue-green light. The system is about 40 light-years from our border, Kim-ji explained. The signals are coming from the third planet and several locations around it. They seem to have spread to at least 4 worlds in their local area. Commander Yulhee leaned forward. What do we know about their technology level? Basic analysis suggests they have nuclear power and early spaceflight, Kim-ji replied. Probably not much of a threat, but maybe willing to join our cause. Taemin studied the display. A new species meant new possibilities. Even a small fleet would help. Every ship mattered now. Their technology might be primitive, he said slowly, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The other representatives began talking at once. Some thought contacting unknown aliens was too dangerous. Others worried that primitive technology would not help against the Vorthak. A few suggested that first contact would take too long. Taemin raised his hand for silence. As Supreme Admiral, the final decision was his to make. We are losing this war, he said clearly. In 6 months, Operation Darkstar will begin. Unless we find new allies or new weapons, the coalition will fall. He pointed to the blue-green world on the display. This unknown species represents hope. Maybe small hope, but still hope. We must try everything. The vote was close. 7 species agreed to send a first contact mission. 5 voted against it, but 7 was enough. Captain So-young would take the diplomatic ship Harmony to make contact with this new species. Her record with peaceful first contact was the best in the fleet. If anyone could convince unknown aliens to help, it would be her. As the meeting ended and representatives returned to their ships, Taemin remained staring at the display. The blue-green world seemed to glow brighter in the darkness of space. He did not know that the world was called Earth. He did not know that its people called themselves humans. He did not know that everything was about to change. But deep in his crystal heart, Admiral Taemin felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. Captain So-young stood on the bridge of the Harmony as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The unknown star system spread before them like a jewel box. The yellow sun blazed in the center while 9 planets orbited in neat circles. The third planet drew her attention immediately. Blue oceans covered most of its surface. White clouds swirled above brown and green continents. It looked peaceful and beautiful. Scan for artificial structures, So-young ordered her crew. As an Altarian, her pale skin could change color to show emotions. Right now it showed calm blue, but inside she felt nervous excitement. Captain, I'm reading thousands of artificial satellites, reported Sensor Officer Haiwan. And there are structures on the planetary surface too. Cities, roads. They have definitely mastered spaceflight. So-young nodded. The Coalition's hope was that this new species would be grateful for contact with advanced galactic civilization. Most primitive species were eager to join the greater community. They would offer their small fleets in exchange for technology and protection. Any signs of weapons? She asked. Yes, Captain. Nuclear weapons on the planet's surface and some kind of energy weapons on their ships. Very basic compared to our technology. Perfect. A species with weapons experience but nothing that could threaten Coalition ships. They would be ideal junior partners in the war against the Vorthak. Open communication channels, So-young commanded. Standard first contact protocols. The Harmony broadcast greetings in 700 different languages. Mathematical concepts came first, then simple pictures, then more complex ideas. It was a process perfected over thousands of years of peaceful contact. The response came faster than expected. A harsh voice spoke in their own language, somehow translated through their primitive computers. Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Jinho of the Earth Defense Force. You are in human space without permission. State your intentions immediately. So-young blinked in surprise. Most species responded to first contact with wonder or fear. These humans sounded suspicious and demanding. This is Captain So-young of the Galactic Coalition, she replied carefully. We come in peace to establish diplomatic relations with your people. Prove it, Jinho said bluntly. Drop your shields and weapons. Submit to inspection by our vessels. Then we will talk. The bridge crew exchanged worried looks. No primitive species had ever made such demands of Coalition ships. So-young's skin shifted to yellow, showing confusion. We prefer to meet in neutral space, she replied. Perhaps a location between our ships? Fine, but our escorts will be armed and ready. Any threatening moves will be met with force. 3 human ships approached the meeting point. So-young watched them through the viewing screen and felt even more confused. The vessels looked crude and ugly. Metal plates were welded together with visible seams. Primitive chemical rockets provided thrust. They looked like something built in a scrapyard, but they moved with purpose and precision. Their formation was tight and professional. These might be primitive people, but they were not afraid. The meeting took place in a small shuttle bay between the two fleets. So Young brought her best diplomats and translators. The humans brought soldiers. Admiral Jin Ho was a stocky man with gray hair and suspicious eyes. He wore a simple uniform covered with ribbons and medals. Behind him stood two guards with energy weapons ready. "Welcome to human space," Jin Ho said without warmth. "Tell us about this coalition of yours." So Young began the standard first contact presentation. She explained how the coalition brought peace and prosperity to the galaxy, how member species shared technology and resources, how everyone benefited from joining the greater community. Jin Ho listened without expression. When she finished, he asked hard questions. How many species in this coalition? Who makes the decisions? What happens to members who want to leave? What are your current military commitments? The questions were not what So Young expected. Most primitive species asked about technology or trade benefits. These humans seemed more interested in politics and power structures. "We are currently engaged in a defensive war against an aggressive species called the Vorthak," she admitted finally. Jin Ho's eyes sharpened. "Tell us about this war." So Young explained the 200-year conflict, how the Vorthak attacked without provocation, how they refused all attempts at peaceful negotiation, how they fought with savage brutality that civilized species found difficult to counter. "So you're losing," Jin Ho said bluntly. "We face challenges," So Young replied carefully. "That is why we seek new allies. You want us to fight your war for you. We offer full membership in the coalition, technology transfers, protected status for your worlds." Jin Ho was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shocked everyone present. "We want to see your military records, battle reports from the last 50 years, tactical analyses, casualty figures, everything." "That information is classified," So Young protested. "Then we have nothing to discuss," Jin Ho said, standing up. "You want our help but won't trust us with basic facts. Come back when you're serious about partnership." The negotiations stalled for 3 days. So Young sent urgent messages to Coalition Command asking for permission to share military data. The response was mixed. Some council members thought it was too dangerous. Others argued they had no choice. Finally, Admiral Taman sent approval. The humans could see limited battle records if they signed security agreements. When the files were transferred, something strange happened. The humans didn't ask for more technology or better trade deals. Instead, they requested detailed psychological profiles of Vorthak prisoners. Colonel Hyun Woo, a human military officer, studied the data for hours. Then he called a meeting with all the coalition diplomats. "Your problem isn't technology," he told them. "Your problem is mindset." "What do you mean?" So Young asked. Hyun Woo activated a portable display. It showed clips from recent human conflicts. So Young watched in growing horror as human soldiers fought with desperate intensity. They used every weapon available. They accepted terrible losses to achieve victory. They seemed to enjoy the violence. "The Vorthak fight like this," Hyunwoo explained. "Total commitment. No mercy, victory or death. You fight like civilized people trying to minimize casualties and preserve resources." "Those are good principles," So Young protested. "Against a civilized enemy, yes. Against the Vorthak, it's suicide." Dr. Miran, a human scientist, joined the discussion. She had been studying the Vorthak prisoner profiles with great interest. "Your enemies have been modified," she said. "Look at these brain scans. The fear centers have been altered. The self-preservation instincts are suppressed. They've been turned into perfect soldiers who don't know how to retreat." "That's horrible," So Young whispered. "It's effective," Miran replied coldly. "But it also means they can be beaten by people who understand their psychology. You've been fighting a civilized war against uncivilized enemies. That's why you keep losing." Admiral Jin Ho leaned forward. "We'll help you fight this war, but not as junior partners following your failed strategies. We do this our way or not at all." So Young's skin turned pale with shock. These humans were offering to help, but on their own terms. They wanted to change how the coalition fought. They wanted to make the war more brutal and savage. "I need to contact my superiors," she said weakly. "Do that," Jin Ho replied. "But remember this, you came to us because you're desperate. Desperate times require desperate measures. We know how to fight desperate wars. The question is whether you're ready to learn. As So Young prepared her report for Coalition Command, she realized that first contact had not gone as planned at all. These humans were not grateful primitives seeking protection. They were something much more dangerous. They were warriors who understood war better than the Coalition did. The question now was whether the Coalition was ready to become warriors too. The emergency session of the Coalition War Council lasted 14 hours. Admiral Taemin watched as representatives argued about Captain So Young's report from the human homeworld. The debate grew heated as species after species voiced their concerns. These humans are dangerous, declared Ambassador Kang Ho of the Peaceful Collective. His tentacles writhed with agitation. They speak of war like others speak of art. This disturbs my people greatly. Commander Yul-hee disagreed. Dangerous or not, they understand something we don't. Look at their analysis of Vorthak psychology. It explains why we keep losing. The room filled with translated arguments in dozens of languages. Some species wanted nothing to do with the violent humans. Others were desperate enough to try anything. The vote was scheduled for the next day. Taemin spent the night reviewing human military records that Captain So Young had transmitted. The files painted a picture of a species that had mastered warfare through centuries of constant conflict. Humans had fought themselves, their environment, and any threat that appeared. They never seemed to run out of ways to kill their enemies. But they also had strict rules about protecting civilians and treating prisoners. They showed mercy to defeated foes and rebuilt what they had destroyed. It was a strange combination of brutality and compassion. The next morning brought news that ended all debate. Vorthak forces had launched a surprise attack on the Rigel colony. 50,000 civilians were dead. The orbital defenses had lasted less than 6 hours. We need help, Taemin announced to the assembled council. Any help we can get. The vote to request human assistance passed by a narrow margin. 7 species in favor, 4 against, 1 abstaining. It was enough. The response from Earth came within days. Admiral Jin Ho would send an expeditionary force of 50,000 volunteers led by General Dong Hyun. The number seemed laughably small compared to the millions of coalition soldiers already fighting. 50,000? Commander Yul-hee asked in disbelief. That's all they're offering? Quality over quantity, replied the human message. Give us your worst problem. We'll show you how to solve it. General Dong Hyun arrived at Nexus Prime aboard a transport ship that looked even cruder than the warships. The man himself was not what anyone expected. He was short and scarred, with gray hair and calm eyes that missed nothing. He moved like someone who had survived many battles. Where do you want us? He asked Taemin without ceremony. Taemin brought up the tactical display. Red markers showed Vorthak positions throughout Coalition space. Most of the territories had been contested for months or years with no clear winner. The Centauri cluster has been stalemated for 8 months, Taemin explained. We've tried everything. The Vorthak hold 4 planets and won't give ground. What's your current plan? Dong Hyun asked. Standard assault doctrine. Orbital bombardment followed by ground forces. We've tried it 6 times with limited success. Dong Hyun studied the battle reports for an hour. Then he looked up with a slight smile. Your problem is that you fight like you're trying not to lose. We'll show you how to fight like you're trying to win. The human general requested unusual things for the upcoming battle. He wanted detailed maps of Vorthak bases, but also information about their food supplies and communication systems. He asked for prisoner uniforms and captured weapons. Most strangely, he wanted to know about Vorthak funeral customs and religious beliefs. Why do you need to know how they bury their dead? Asked Lieutenant Commander Subin, the Coalition tactical officer assigned to work with human forces. Because we're going to give them reasons to hold funerals, replied Major So-hee, one of Dong Hyun's staff officers. Her smile was not pleasant. The assault on the Centauri cluster began like every other Coalition attack. Warships moved into position around the contested planets. Orbital bombardment began at precise coordinates designed to minimize collateral damage. Ground forces prepared for careful advances supported by air cover. The Vorthak response followed the usual pattern. They absorbed the bombardment in their underground bunkers. When Coalition troops landed, Vorthak forces emerged to fight with suicidal bravery. Both sides took heavy losses while the front lines barely moved. Then the humans revealed what they had been doing. Infiltration teams led by Captain Tae-ho had spent weeks sneaking onto Vorthak-held worlds. They wore captured uniforms and carried enemy weapons. They spoke no Vorthak language, but they didn't need to. They communicated through violence. The first sign something was wrong came from Vorthak communications. Panicked reports spoke of supply convoys disappearing, command bunkers going silent, elite units found dead with their own weapons. Ghost soldiers, the Vorthak called them. They appear from nowhere. They kill without honor. They vanish like spirits. Coalition forces had never seen psychological warfare like this. The humans didn't just fight the enemy army. They fought the enemy mind. Every Vorthak soldier began looking over his shoulder. Every shadow might hide death. But the real breakthrough came when human forces engaged Vorthak troops directly. Colonel Hyun Jae led a battalion against a fortified position that had held out for 3 months. Coalition observers expected another bloody stalemate. Instead, they witnessed something that changed their understanding of warfare. The humans fought with the same intensity as the Vorthak. They accepted casualties that would make coalition commanders retreat. They used tactics that seemed insane, charging directly into enemy fire, fighting hand-to-hand in trenches, using explosives at close range. But unlike the Vorthak, the humans kept their ability to think. They adapted to changing conditions. They coordinated complex maneuvers while screaming battle cries. They combined savage aggression with tactical intelligence. For the first time in the war, Vorthak forces experienced something they had never felt before: fear. The fortified position fell in 6 hours. Vorthak survivors spoke of enemies who fought like demons but thought like generals. The psychological impact spread through enemy forces faster than any weapon. Within 2 weeks, the entire Centauri cluster was back under coalition control. The victory cost fewer ships and soldiers than any major operation in recent years. More importantly, it inflicted devastating losses on Vorthak forces who had never learned how to retreat. News of the success spread quickly through coalition space. Military officers who had dismissed humans as primitive barbarians suddenly wanted to study their methods. Political leaders who had opposed human involvement began asking for more human advisors. But the victory came with a price. Coalition soldiers who witnessed human combat methods were disturbed by what they saw. These humans seemed to enjoy fighting. They celebrated their enemies' deaths with grim satisfaction. They spoke of war like poets spoke of beauty. "Are we sure we want allies like this?" asked Elder Wu Jin during a private meeting with Admiral Taemin. "They may defeat the Vorthak, but what happens after? What if we cannot control them?" Taemin looked at the tactical display showing Centauri cluster back in coalition hands. "We were losing this war," he replied quietly. "These humans have shown us a way to win. The question is not whether we can control them. The question is whether we can learn from them." General Dong Hyun's final report was brutally honest. "You've been fighting this war for over 2 centuries and accomplishing nothing. Your enemy doesn't respect mercy or honor. They only respect strength. If you want to win, you need to become stronger than they are." The report included recommendations that shocked coalition leadership. Human military advisors should be assigned to every major battle group. Coalition soldiers should receive training in psychological warfare. Most controversially, the rules of engagement should be modified to match Vorthak brutality. "We're asking you to become something you're not," Dong Hyun admitted. "The question is, what's more important? Staying civilized or staying alive?" As Vorthak forces regrouped and prepared their response to the Centauri defeat, coalition leaders faced the hardest decision in their history. They could continue fighting their civilized war and slowly lose everything they valued, or they could embrace human methods and win a war that would change them forever. Admiral Taemin stood alone in his office, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Operation Darkstar was being prepared. The final Vorthak offensive would come soon. When it did, the coalition would need every advantage they could find, even if those advantages came with a terrible price. The humans had shown them how to win. Now they had to decide if they were brave enough to pay the cost of victory. The Vorthak response to their defeat at Centauri was swift and terrible. Instead of mourning their losses or adjusting their strategy, they did something that shocked even the humans. They abandoned all pretense of civilized warfare. Admiral Taemin received the first reports while reviewing human training programs for coalition officers. The data made his crystal skin turn pale with horror. 12 worlds attacked simultaneously, reported Intelligence Chief Baksu. "They're not trying to capture territory anymore. They're trying to destroy everything." The tactical display showed red markers spreading across coalition space like drops of blood. Vorthak forces were hitting civilian targets, orbital stations, and even hospital ships. The rules of war that had limited their brutality for 2 centuries had been thrown away. How many casualties? Taemin asked, though he dreaded the answer. Initial estimates show 3 million dead in the first day, Boksu replied quietly. The attacks are continuing. Our forces are scattered and can't respond to everything at once. The coalition military machine, designed for careful defensive actions, collapsed under the weight of simultaneous crises. Commanders tried to follow established protocols while their worlds burned around them. Ship captains waited for orders that never came as communication networks overloaded. But scattered throughout coalition space, human advisors and training teams began operating independently. Without waiting for official orders or coalition approval, they took action. Captain Taeho found himself defending New Altair with 8,000 humans and 30,000 coalition troops against a Vorthak invasion force of 500,000. The odds were impossible. The situation was hopeless, so he ignored both facts and got to work. Evacuate all civilians from the capital city, he ordered the local coalition commander. Then give me every explosive device you have. We can't abandon the capital, protested General Namsu, the Altarian defense chief. It's the symbol of our civilization. Symbols don't win wars, Taeho replied harshly. Bodies do. Living bodies beat dead symbols every time. The humans turned New Altair's beautiful capital into a death trap. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a killing zone. Parks and monuments were mined with explosives. The crystal spires that tourists admired became sniper nests. When Vorthak forces landed, they expected to fight coalition troops using standard defensive tactics. Instead, they walked into a nightmare designed by human military engineers. The 1st Vorthak Regiment entered the capital through the main avenue. They advanced in perfect formation, their weapons ready for traditional combat. Then the buildings around them exploded. Not all the buildings, just enough to block their retreat and channel them toward prepared positions. Human snipers opened fire from crystal towers while coalition troops hit them from underground tunnels. The Vorthak tried to adapt, but the humans were always one step ahead. When enemy forces took cover in buildings, the humans collapsed the structures on top of them. When Vorthak troops tried to advance through sewers, they found the tunnels filled with poison gas. For 43 days, fewer than 40,000 defenders held off an invasion force 12 times their size. They achieved this miracle through tactics that horrified coalition observers, but devastated Vorthak morale. The humans didn't just kill their enemies. They terrorized them. Vorthak patrols found their dead comrades arranged in disturbing patterns. Supply convoys discovered booby traps that killed in creative ways. Even Vorthak officers began showing signs of psychological breakdown. Meanwhile, across the galaxy on the crystalline homeworld, Colonel Hyun Jae faced a different kind of challenge. The peaceful crystal beings had never experienced warfare on their own soil. Their entire civilization was built around harmony and nonviolence. The Vorthak occupation force expected easy control over a population that had no concept of resistance. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire planet that had been transformed into a resistance network. Hyun Jae had spent months teaching crystal civilians techniques their species had never imagined. How to sabotage machinery without being detected, how to pass information through seemingly innocent activities, how to kill occupying soldiers with common household items. The crystal beings learned these lessons with terrifying efficiency. Their natural ability to blend with their crystalline environment made them perfect guerrilla fighters. Their peaceful reputation made Vorthak forces underestimate them completely. Crystal civilians who had spent centuries creating beautiful art now used their skills to create beautiful bombs. Poets who had written about love and harmony composed coded messages that coordinated attacks on enemy positions. Children who had played innocent games now played deadly games of hide-and-seek with Vorthak patrols. The psychological impact on Vorthak forces was devastating. They had conquered dozens of worlds, but always through direct military action. Now they faced an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. The very stones fight against us, one captured Vorthak officer reported. Their children smile at us in the day and kill us in the night. This is not war. This is madness. But the breakthrough that would change everything came from Dr. Miran's research facility on Luna Base. while Coalition and human forces fought desperate battles across the galaxy. She had been studying Vorthak prisoners with growing excitement. "I found their weakness," she announced during her urgent communication with Admiral Tamin. "The neural modifications that make them fearless also make them vulnerable." The holographic display showed brain scans from Vorthak prisoners. Miran pointed to specific areas highlighted in red. "They've suppressed natural fear responses to create perfect soldiers," she explained. "But fear serves important functions. It helps process complex information. It aids in tactical flexibility. It allows for strategic retreat when necessary." "What does this mean practically?" Tamin asked. "It means they can't adapt to completely unexpected situations. Their brains literally can't process information that doesn't fit their combat programming. And there's something else." Miran activated another display showing psychological profiles. The modifications were done gradually over several generations. But there are limits to how much you can change a brain without causing complete breakdown. They're already operating at maximum psychological stress. Can we use this against them? The humans already are, Miran replied with a cold smile. Every unconventional tactic they use pushes Vorthak psychology closer to critical failure. Captain Tejo's defense of New Altair isn't just militarily effective, it's psychologically devastating. The implications were staggering. The Coalition had been fighting a military war against an enemy that was fundamentally a psychological construct. The Vorthak weren't naturally fearless warriors. They were artificially created soldiers whose programming could be broken. As news of successful human operations spread, Coalition public opinion began shifting dramatically. What had seemed like primitive barbarism now appeared to be sophisticated psychological warfare that their advanced civilization had never understood. Military academies that had taught classical strategy for thousands of years suddenly scrambled to understand human methods. Officers who had dismissed terror tactics as uncivilized began requesting human advisors for their units. But the change came with costs that troubled many Coalition leaders. Civilians who had lived peaceful lives for centuries were learning to kill with improvised weapons. Soldiers trained to minimize casualties were adopting methods designed to maximize enemy suffering. Are we still the same civilization we were fighting to protect? Elder Wu Jin asked during a private council session. If we become like our enemies to defeat them, what exactly have we won? Admiral Tamin understood the concern, but the alternatives were worse. We're adapting to survive, he replied. The humans haven't made us into something we're not. They've shown us capabilities we always had but were afraid to use. The siege of New Altair ended when Vorthak forces simply abandoned the planet. For the first time in their military history, an enemy had broken their will to fight. The psychological victory was more important than the tactical one. As scattered reports came in from human operations across Coalition space, a pattern emerged. Wherever humans applied their methods, Vorthak forces showed increasing signs of psychological breakdown. The artificially enhanced warriors were encountering something their programming hadn't prepared them for. They were meeting humans who fought with the same intensity but kept their ability to think, adapt, and terrify their enemies in ways no programming could anticipate. The war was changing, and for the first time in 2 centuries, the Coalition was winning. General Dong Hyun spread the tactical maps across the conference table in Admiral Tamin's private office. The human commander looked tired but determined. His scarred hands pointed to the heart of Vorthak space. Stop thinking like victims, he said bluntly. You've spent 2 centuries reacting to their moves. Time to make them react to yours. Admiral Tamin studied the proposed battle plans with growing concern. The human strategy was audacious beyond anything the Coalition had ever attempted. Instead of trying to reclaim lost territory piece by piece, Donghyun wanted to strike directly at the Vorthak homeworld. This would require our entire fleet, Tamin pointed out. If we fail, the Coalition falls completely. If you keep playing defense, you fall anyway, Donghyun replied. Operation Darkstar launches in 2 months. When it does, they'll hit every core world simultaneously. You can't defend everything. The logic was brutal but accurate. Intelligence reports confirmed that Vorthak forces were massing for their final offensive. 8,000 warships supported by millions of ground troops. The Coalition could maybe defend 3 or 4 worlds effectively. The rest would burn. What makes you think we can succeed where defensive strategies have failed? Asked Commander Yul He, who had joined the secret planning session. Major Sohi activated a holographic display showing recent battle reports. Look at the pattern. Every time human forces engage Vorthak troops using unconventional methods, enemy morale collapses faster than their military capabilities. The data was convincing. Vorthak units that had fought ferociously for decades were now surrendering or retreating when faced with human psychological warfare. Their artificial fearlessness was breaking down under tactics their programming couldn't handle. We've identified the critical weakness in their neural modifications, added Dr. Miran, joining the meeting through secure communication from her research station. Their brains can't process truly unexpected threats. Every human victory makes the next one easier. Taiman felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Everything they had built, everything they had fought to protect, would depend on this single massive gamble. The Council will never approve such an aggressive strategy, he said quietly. Then don't ask them, Donghyun suggested. Military commanders have authority to respond to immediate threats. By the time Operation Darkstar launches, this becomes an emergency response. It was a dangerous game of timing and politics. If the offensive failed, Taemin would be responsible for the greatest military disaster in coalition history. If they did nothing, the Vorthak would destroy everything anyway. How long do you need to prepare? Taemin asked. 3 weeks for positioning. Another week for final infiltration operations. Then we strike everything at once. The next month saw the largest military movement in coalition history. Under the cover of routine fleet rotations and training exercises, warships began moving toward Vorthak space. The operation required perfect coordination between dozens of species and thousands of vessels. Meanwhile, human special forces teams began the most dangerous part of the plan. Led by Major Sohee and Captain Jinwoo, they had to establish hidden bases deep in enemy territory months before the main attack. The infiltration mission read like something from a nightmare. Teams of humans would travel in captured Vorthak ships, wearing enemy uniforms carrying forged identification. They would live among their enemies for weeks while gathering intelligence and preparing sabotage operations. Captain Jinwoo's team targeted the primary Vorthak communication hub on the moon of Kethvar. For 37 days, they posed as maintenance workers while mapping the facility and identifying critical systems. The hardest part isn't avoiding detection, Jinwoo reported during a coded transmission. It's not killing them immediately. These people enslaved their own minds for war. Part of me wants to put them out of their misery. The psychological cost of deep infiltration was something coalition forces had never considered. Human operators had to live among enemies they despised while pretending to be allies. It required a level of mental discipline that few species could maintain. Major Sohee's mission was even more dangerous. She led a team tasked with infiltrating Vorthak Prime itself, the enemy homeworld that no coalition agent had ever seen. They would spend weeks in the heart of enemy civilization, gathering intelligence for the final assault. The cities are like military bases, she reported. Everything is designed for war production. Children train with weapons before they learn to read. Old people work in ammunition factories until they die. This entire species has been turned into a war machine. Her reports painted a picture of a civilization that had sacrificed everything for military power. Art, literature, music, philosophy. All had been abandoned in favor of weapons research and combat training. The Vorthak had won many battles but lost their souls in the process. As the infiltration teams gathered intelligence, the main coalition fleet continued its careful positioning. Admiral Taemin had never commanded such a massive force. Every major warship in coalition space was now moving toward Vorthak territory, under various pretenses. The deception required incredible skill. Fleet movements had to appear routine, while actually preparing for coordinated assault. Communication between ships had to seem normal, while actually coordinating the most complex military operation in galactic history. Commander Yu Jin, one of the most experienced coalition fleet officers, began having doubts as the operation expanded. "We're committing everything to this attack," she told Taemin during a private meeting. "Our best ships, our most experienced crews, our entire strategic reserve. If this fails, we have nothing left." "If we do nothing, we have nothing left anyway," Taemin replied. "At least this way we choose how we fall." 2 days before the attack was scheduled to begin, intelligence reports brought disturbing news. Operation Darkstar had been moved up. Vorthak forces would begin their final offensive in less than a week. The timing was perfect and terrifying. The Coalition counterattack would hit Vorthak core worlds just as their fleet departed for Coalition space. Success would strand the enemy offensive without support. Failure would leave Coalition worlds completely defenseless. No changing plans now, General Dong Hyun announced to the assembled commanders. We go in 2 days as scheduled. Win or lose, this ends the war. The final briefings were held on board the flagship Determination. Representatives from every Coalition species gathered to hear the battle plan that would determine their civilization's fate. Colonel Min-ho, now commanding human ground forces, outlined the surface assault on Vorthak Prime. We don't take prisoners. We don't negotiate. We don't show mercy. This is total war against an enemy that understands nothing else. The words would have horrified Coalition leaders 2 years ago. Now they seemed like simple tactical necessity. The humans had taught them that some enemies could only be defeated by becoming more terrible than they were. As the massive fleet prepared for hyperspace jump, Admiral Taemin stood alone on the bridge, looking out at more warships than he had ever seen in one place. Thousands of vessels representing 12 different species, all united by human leadership and human methods. Final intelligence report from infiltration teams, announced Communications Officer Park SEO. All targets confirmed. Sabotage operations ready to begin on your command. Taemin took a deep breath. In a few hours, they would either achieve the greatest military victory in Coalition history or suffer their final defeat. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. Signal all ships, he commanded. Operation Reversal begins now. May the stars have mercy on us all. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire civilization. Behind them, Coalition worlds waited in the darkness, praying that their defenders would return victorious. Ahead of them, the Vorthak Empire waited unknowingly for Judgment Day. The final battle for Vorthak Prime began at 800 Coalition Standard Time. Admiral Taemin watched from the bridge of the Determination as the largest fleet in galactic history dropped out of hyperspace around the enemy. Homeworld, the planet below, looked like a fortress. Massive orbital defense platforms surrounded it like deadly moons. Energy shields covered the major cities. Weapon batteries that could destroy entire fleets pointed outward from the surface. Enemy fleet composition? Taemin asked his tactical officer. 2,000 ships in immediate defensive positions, reported Lieutenant Su-jin. Another 1,000 spread throughout the system. They weren't expecting us, but they're responding quickly. The Vorthak had left most of their fleet for Operation Darkstar, but what remained was still formidable. These were their elite units, the ones trusted to defend their most important world. Begin Phase 1, Taemin ordered. Across the system, human infiltration teams activated their sabotage operations simultaneously. Captain Jinwoo's team destroyed the primary communication hub on Kethavar Moon. Major Sohee's people took out the Central Defense Coordination Center on Vorthak Prime itself. The results were immediate and devastating. Enemy forces that had been responding with coordinated precision suddenly became confused and disorganized. Ships moved without knowing where their allies were. Defense platforms fired at empty space because they had lost target data. Phase 2, Taemin commanded. Commander, Yujin led the main fleet assault with tactics that would have been unthinkable before human contact. Instead of careful formations designed to minimize losses, Coalition ships attacked in aggressive waves that maximized confusion and psychological impact. The battle was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Coalition vessels fought with human-inspired ferocity while maintaining their technological advantages. They rammed enemy ships when boarding was possible. They targeted civilian infrastructure when military targets were unavailable. They broadcast surrender demands in terms that offered no mercy for resistance. But the real shock came when human boarding parties began capturing Vorthak vessels intact. Colonel Min-ho had trained Coalition Marines in techniques that their enemies had never encountered. The humans didn't fight to destroy enemy ships. They fought to steal them. Teams led by Captain Dong-soo used captured Vorthak uniforms and identification to board enemy vessels during the confusion of battle. Once inside, they moved with ruthless efficiency to capture bridge control. Vorthak Dreadnought Kethmar has been captured, reported Communications Officer Park SEO. Human crew is turning its weapons on other enemy ships. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthak crews watched their own vessels turn against them. Their most powerful weapons were suddenly being used by their enemies. The impossible was happening. Within 6 hours, the orbital battle was over. Half the Vorthak fleet had been destroyed. The other half had been captured or forced to retreat to the outer system. The way was clear for surface operations. General Dong Hyun led the planetary assault from the command ship Thunder. His forces included both human marines and coalition troops trained in human methods. They would face the most fanatical defenders in Vorthak space. "Remember," he told his officers during the final briefing, "we're not here to occupy this world. We're here to end their ability to make war, do whatever is necessary to achieve that goal." The surface campaign was brutal beyond anything the coalition had ever witnessed. Human forces fought their way through cities that had been turned into fortress complexes. They used every weapon available, from orbital bombardment to improvised explosives. But more importantly, they used psychological warfare that broke the enemy's will to resist. Broadcasting equipment captured from Vorthak communication centers began transmitting human messages throughout the planet. "Your fleet is destroyed," the messages announced in perfect Vorthak language. "Your orbital defenses have fallen. Your leaders have abandoned you. Surrender now and live. Resist and die." The messages were accompanied by footage from the orbital battle. Vorthak populations saw their invincible warships being captured and turned against them. They watched their defense platforms exploding under coalition fire. They witnessed their own government buildings burning under human assault. For a species that had been taught victory was inevitable, the images were psychologically devastating. The breakthrough came when Colonel Minho's forces reached the Vorthak High Command bunker. The massive underground complex housed the enemy leadership that had directed 2 centuries of war. The assault lasted 18 hours and was broadcast live throughout coalition space. Billions of beings watched as human soldiers fought their way through levels of fortification that should have been impregnable. General Dong Hyun personally led the final assault on the command center. The aging human warrior moved through enemy fire with the determination of someone who had seen too much war to fear death. The Vorthak leadership made their last stand in the deepest chamber of the bunker. Supreme Commander Kethvor and his staff had prepared for glorious death in battle. Instead, they faced something they had never encountered: complete military defeat. "Surrender," Dong Hyun told them simply. "Order all your forces to stand down immediately." "We choose death before dishonor," Kethvor replied, raising his weapon. "Your choice," Dong Hyun said, and shot him. The surrender came not through negotiation but through simple collapse. Vorthak forces throughout their empire received word that their leadership was dead and their homeworld was captured. Without central coordination, their artificial courage finally broke completely. Ships that had fought with suicidal bravery for decades suddenly began surrendering to the nearest coalition vessels. Ground forces that had never retreated abandoned their positions and fled. Entire worlds that had been loyal to the Empire declared independence. Operation Darkstar died before it truly began. Vorthak fleets heading for coalition worlds received recall orders from their new human-controlled command centers. Those that refused to return were hunted down by captured. Vorthak warships crewed by coalition forces. The war that had lasted 2 centuries ended in 18 hours of overwhelming violence. But victory came with costs that troubled the coalition leadership. Admiral Tae-min stood in the ruins of the Vorthak capital and tried to process what they had become. The humans had shown them how to win, but winning had required becoming something darker than they had ever imagined. Coalition soldiers had learned to kill without mercy. Civilized species had embraced tactics that their ancestors would have called barbaric. Was it worth it? Captain So-young asked as she surveyed the destroyed city. She had been promoted to ambassador after her successful first contact mission, but now she wondered if that contact had been a blessing or a curse. "Ask me in 100 years, Taemin replied quietly, "when we see what kind of civilization we become." The immediate aftermath brought new challenges. Millions of Vorthak prisoners required processing and rehabilitation. Their neural modifications could be reversed, but the process would take generations. Former enemy worlds needed new governments and economic systems. Dr. Miran's research facilities became crucial for helping former enemies reintegrate into galactic society. But the work was slow and difficult. A species that had been turned into living weapons couldn't be easily converted back into peaceful citizens. The political changes were equally dramatic. The coalition had survived, but its fundamental nature had changed. The Human Defense Corps became a permanent military branch, with authority to act independently in crisis situations. Some member species welcomed this development. Others worried about the long-term implications of militarizing their peaceful civilization. A few quietly began discussing whether they wanted to remain part of an organization that could wage such terrible wars. The victory celebration on Nexus Prime was subdued. Representatives from all coalition species gathered to honor their defenders, but the mood was complex. They had won, but at the cost of their innocence. General Dong Hyun received the coalition's highest military decoration. His acceptance speech was brief and troubling. "We showed you how to win this war," he said to the assembled delegates. "But winning wars is the easy part. The hard part is remembering why the war was worth fighting in the first place." As human colonists began settling former Vorthak worlds, they carried with them both hope and warning. They established schools and hospitals alongside military bases. They taught former enemies about art and literature, while maintaining the weapons that had defeated them. The final scene of the Great War took place on Earth, where Admiral Taemin visited the human homeworld to sign formal treaties. Standing in a place humans called New York, he watched children playing in parks while their parents worked in offices that looked nothing like military bases. "How do you do it?" he asked Admiral Jinho during their last meeting. "How do you fight such terrible wars and still maintain peaceful societies?" Jinho looked out at the city around them. Millions of humans lived normal lives while their military protected them from threats they would never see. "We remember what we're fighting for," he said simply. "Peace isn't the absence of war. Peace is what you have when strong people are willing to fight for it." As Taemin returned to Coalition Space H, 5 years after the fall of Vorthak Prime, Admiral Taemin stood before the Coalition Council in chambers that had been rebuilt to accommodate new members. The room buzzed with translations in dozens of languages, but now those languages included reformed Vorthak dialects and human regional tongues. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. "The integration report shows remarkable progress," announced Dr. Miran. Now serving as Director of Species Rehabilitation, her research had expanded from studying Vorthak psychology to helping entire populations adapt to peaceful existence. The holographic display showed statistics that would have seemed impossible during the war. Former Vorthak worlds were producing art, literature, and music for the first time in centuries. Their modified warriors were learning to be farmers, teachers, and engineers. But the process was not simple or easy. Rehabilitation centers on former Vorthak worlds report increasing incidents, continued Dr. Miran. Many subjects are struggling with the removal of their neural modifications. They experience anxiety, depression, and confusion when their artificial fearlessness is taken away. Representative Dalho of the Mechanical Collective processed this information with clicking sounds. "How many subjects are we treating?" "Approximately 47 million former Vorthak military personnel," Miran replied. "Another 130 million civilians who were psychologically conditioned for war support roles." The numbers were staggering. An entire civilization had been turned into a war machine over generations. Reversing that transformation was proving to be one of the greatest challenges in galactic history. Ambassador So Young, now the Coalition's chief liaison with human governments, stood to address the Council. Her experiences during First Contact had made her an expert on human psychology and methods. "The Human Defense Corps has established training centers on 18 worlds," she reported. "They're teaching both Coalition forces and reformed Vorthak personnel new methods of peacekeeping." The Human Defense Corps had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic civilization. They were soldiers who specialized in ending wars rather than fighting them. Their methods combined human psychological understanding with Coalition technology to create peace through strength. General Dong Hyun, now Supreme Commander of Coalition Defense Forces, had developed doctrines that seemed contradictory, but proved effective. His forces were trained to be more dangerous than any enemy, while maintaining strict moral codes about protecting innocent life. "Our newest graduates include 57 former Vorthak officers," Dong Hyun reported during his monthly briefing. "They're among our most dedicated students. People who have seen the cost of endless war make the best guardians of peace." The transformation of former enemies into protectors was perhaps the most remarkable achievement of the post-war period. Vorthak soldiers who had once fought with suicidal fury now worked alongside humans to prevent conflicts before they could begin. Captain Tejo, now Colonel, led mixed units that included humans, coalition species, and reformed Vorthak personnel. His recent mission to the Outer Rim demonstrated how much military doctrine had changed. The Kalari Republic was preparing for war against the Benth Federation, he reported to the Council. Standard coalition diplomacy had failed. Both sides were mobilizing their fleets. In the old days, the coalition would have tried to mediate while preparing for another long conflict. Instead, Tejo's unit had implemented what humans called preventive peacekeeping. We arrived in system with overwhelming force, Tejo continued. Not to threaten either side, but to make war impossible. When both fleets saw what modern military power looked like, they chose negotiation instead. The demonstration had included captured Vorthak dreadnoughts operated by mixed crews. The sight of former enemies working together under human leadership had shocked both sides into reconsidering their conflict. No shots were fired, Tejo concluded. Both governments agreed to binding arbitration rather than face the possibility of real war. This new approach to galactic security troubled some coalition members but proved remarkably effective. Conflicts that might have lasted decades were ended in weeks through the simple demonstration that war was no longer profitable. Elder Wu Jin of the Ethereal Collective raised concerns that many shared. We have achieved peace through fear. Is this the civilization we wanted to preserve? The question haunted coalition leadership. They had survived, but at the cost of becoming something their ancestors might not recognize. The gentle, civilized society that had once existed seemed lost forever. General Dong Hyun addressed these concerns with typical human directness. Fear of consequences prevents conflict, but so does hope for better alternatives. We provide both. The human approach to peace was complex and sometimes disturbing. They maintained military forces capable of terrible destruction, while simultaneously building schools, hospitals, and cultural centers on former battlefields, on New Vorthak. The rebuilt capital of the former enemy homeworld, human administrators worked alongside reformed Vorthak leaders to create something unprecedented. A warrior culture was learning to channel its intensity toward construction rather than destruction. Major So-hee, now governor of the New Vorthak territory, faced daily challenges that required both military experience and diplomatic skill. Former enemy populations needed security, but they also needed hope. We're teaching them that strength can be used for protection instead of conquest, she reported during a council meeting. It's slow work, but we're seeing progress. The progress was visible in ways both large and small. Former Vorthak children attended schools where they learned mathematics alongside art. Adults who had known only military discipline discovered talents for music, poetry, and scientific research. But the integration process created new problems that no one had anticipated. Several coalition member species began expressing concern about human influence on their own societies. The peaceful collective worried that their young people were becoming too interested in military service. The Crystalline Republic found their traditionally non-violent culture adopting competitive sports that resembled combat training. Humans are changing us, all, observed Commander Yul-hee during a private meeting with Admiral Tae-min. Not just our military doctrine, but our fundamental nature. The concern was valid. Human concepts of acceptable risk, competitive achievement, and individual responsibility were spreading throughout coalition space. Species that had lived in harmony for millennia were discovering drives and ambitions they had never known they possessed. Dr. Miran's research suggested this was inevitable. Humans didn't just show us how to fight, she explained. They showed us how to strive. Competition, conflict, and achievement are all part of the same psychological framework. The long-term implications remained unclear. Would the coalition become a more dynamic, ambitious civilization, or would it lose the peaceful wisdom that had made it worth defending? Admiral Tae-min found answers in unexpected places. During a visit to Earth's colonies in former Vorthak space, he observed human families raising children alongside reformed enemy populations. Human children played with young Vorthak in games that taught both cooperation and competition. Former enemies learned from each other while maintaining their distinct cultures. It was integration without assimilation. How do you balance these contradictions? He asked Admiral Jin-ho during their meeting. We don't balance them, Jin-ho replied. We embrace them. Peace and war, cooperation and competition, mercy and strength, they're all part of the same reality. The trick is knowing when to use which approach. The wisdom was simple but profound. Humans had not solved the contradiction between civilization and survival. They had learned to live with both as necessary aspects of existence. As the Coalition Council prepared to vote on new expansion policies, Admiral Taman reflected on how far they had all come. The galaxy was safer, but it was also more complex. New challenges required new solutions, and new solutions brought new responsibilities. The humans had taught them that victory was possible. Now they were learning that maintaining victory required constant vigilance, adaptation, and the wisdom to know when strength must serve peace rather than the other way around. The war was over, but the work of building a better galaxy had just begun.